Recording in progress.
Good morning, everybody. It is wonderful to see everyone. We are going to be starting a completely new series this Sunday morning, and this is a series called A Crash Course in the Jewish Lifestyle. I feel this is so funny because everybody says, well, we know all these things, and the truth is that we really don't. And what I've been doing over the course of the last few years is that anytime there's a juncture, anytime that there's an important moment in Jewish life, what I try to do is I try to ask myself, what are the questions that people would want to know? What are the kind of things that are what I call FAS, frequently asked shilas? And what I've been doing is slowly building up over the course of time and writing down frameworks for each stage of life. And then discussing it with people and giving them a sort of a cheat sheet of the basics to have, without all the complicated sources and without all the complicated details, just having the most basics addressed. And what I said to myself is that why don't we just formalize this, turn this into a long trajectory, because I certainly haven't covered all the research, and a lot of people go through these stages, whether the first time or second generation or third generation in, and there's so much to learn, there's so much to appreciate. So that's the idea. What we're going to start is actually 18 parts to the series. Okay, because life is broad. We're going to go from birth to death and beyond. And everything in between. Yes, there's a lot beyond, because after death, there's burial, Shiva, Shloshim, Yortzites, and beyond that, then we can also start talking about things like Chanukah, Sabayis, Siyums, graduations, anniversary, other pieces of life, which hopefully we'll be able to bring in afterwards. There are really a lot of very fascinating, we'll call milestones in life, which are enhanced, elevated, and expressed through our learning in Judaism. I look forward to doing that with us. So here's the way it's going to work. Just the overview is that we're going to learn the ideas conceptually. We'll go through some halachic and some philosophical ideas. At the end, rather than use them as sources, I'm going to hand out what an FAS looks like, which is an FAQ, just with all the basics as a summary. So everybody has it over there. But I don't want to belabor people, because I don't want this to be a look inside, look up kind of experience. I'd like it to be that we're learning and thinking together. I'd like to start off by thanking Suri. Suri Davis has very kindly sponsored the series, the entire series. And it is actually around now that Suri has 3 yard sites that are just around this time. We're just beginning the stage first for her grandmother. And that my grandmother is Esther Bas Menachem Mendel, and also coming up shortly is Suri's father, and also just the day afterwards, or the day before, is her grandson as well. So just a whole life cycle, of family. And in commemorating Suri's grandmother, Esther, Bubby Davis. Just a little bit of perspective is, and this is it's so important, especially for those 5 Townses who've been here for many years, can appreciate that she was a person who was in the 5 Towns many cycles back, before it became what it is today. And she was a person who was really the Tomchei Shabbos in the 5 Towns at the time, before it became popular. She didn't drive, but what she'd do is she'd make the chicken. She'd make the chicken soup, the potato kugel, the sponge cake, all the Shabbos accoutrements, and she would put it into a grocery wagon and walk it to all the parts of the community and deliver it, and that's obviously set the stage for much of the incredible chesed for those of us who live here and appreciate where that comes from. There were many founding fathers and mothers of this community, and one of them was Bubby. Nishmasa Eden Mesheva Lichter Gegan Eden. We're going to let's start. So we'll start at the beginning, a little bit of philosophy, a little bit of questions, and then back to philosophy as well. So really, if we're going to focus on birth, it's fascinating. Most people don't have a chance to prepare or think so much about this. What I try so hard to do is that when I'm in touch with a couple and they're at the stages of a late pregnancy, I try to reach out to say, well, okay, let's talk. There's a lot to talk about, because there's so many things to consider. But the truth is, actually, it really begins before that. I'm going to just add one very deep spiritual point, and then we're going to get to the tail end of pregnancy. But that is that the Torah tells us a pasuk which we all know, but we perhaps just glide over. The Torah tells us at the beginning of Parshas Tazria, it says, "Daber b'nei Yisrael emor, isha ki sazria v'yolda zachar." So it describes that when a woman will have children, and then it describes the process of the halachic process that happens afterwards. And what is noted by the commentators is that there are two words to denote birth there. There's tazria and there's yolda. Those are two separate words. What do they mean precisely? So the Or HaChaim HaKodesh is a very fascinating essay, which I highly recommend that people who are able to access this take a moment to look at this. As he points out, based on the pasuk that Achar v'kedem yetzartani, that forward and backwards God created us, is that there are two stages of creation. There's we'll call it the creation of the soul, drawing a soul down, and then there is the creation of the body, which is going to be the vehicle for that soul. So there's two parts to the creation process, as it related to when God was doing that for us. That's what happened, and therefore similarly when we are, as so to speak, micro creators, as God gave us the capacity of creation, we also do the same thing. And the first stage is called Tazria. The second stage is called Leda. Tazria is conception, and that's the spiritual creation of the soul, whereas Yolda is the physical creation of the body that is emerging into this world and is now being fused together with that soul. And it's important to appreciate the difference in this, because, and as the Or HaChaim HaKodesh points out, is that when it comes to the spiritual creation process, intent and thought actually makes a difference, a huge difference when it comes to that creation process. So the thought of a couple at time of the conception has an impact spiritually on the neshama that is going to be drawn down to this world, which is going to attach to the now forming biological body. So yes, we can track the splitting of the cells, we can track every stage of that pregnancy and project what it's going to be. That's the biological process of creation, which has been set into process, but there's also a soul which is going to be tethered to that body, to that vehicle. And the process at the beginning of Tazria, the earlier in the creation process, the more consequential thought and ideas are, which is fascinating. Because unfortunately, most times in today's society, children are the afterthought. It's not that was the by the way, the byproduct of an experience. Whereas in Torah ideology, it's actually supposed to be the foremost thought. And there's a lot of writing around what that is and the purity of this. In terms of architecture, so imagine that you had a building, and there was a mistake that was made. So you're putting up a house, and then the architect comes to you and says, "Listen, we've got a problem. We chose the wrong doorknobs." So you say, "Okay, it's like a real hassle. It's going to take, but just go to Lowe's and just buy new doorknobs, and you'll just replace them." That's not the end of the world. The thing you don't want him to say is, "Well, we have a little bit of a problem in the blueprint in the basement." Right? You don't just go to Lowe's at that point in time. Now you've got a structural problem, right? Now you're going to have a code issue. Now you have a safety issue at hand. You can't just replace. You can't just figure that out. The earlier in the process of creation, the more significant it is to that creation. Because when something goes wrong, then that could have longer ramifications. And that's the same thing with the process of conceiving and having a child. The earlier, the more consequential. We know this physically, right? So that's why mothers who are carrying, who are pregnant and carrying children, had to be so careful physically. Alcohol, caffeination, medications, right? That's the biological side of it. Spiritually as well. Now, what is interesting is that the Or HaChaim says, and you'll never read this pasuk to say the same again, is that the Or HaChaim notes. He says perhaps this is what is meant at the beginning of Parshas Lech Lecha. What does it mean? It says by Avram and Sarai at the time that they're making their way from the area of Mesopotamia between the Euphrates and Tigris. They're making their way down to this other area called Canaan under different rulers. And it says they bring along with them a nefesh asher asul becharan, the souls that they made in Haran. And we are all conditioned to understand that through Rashi's lens, which is that they brought about all these people that are partners in Torah, Project Inspire, Esha Torah, Chabad. They were amazing. They just had all these people gravitated towards them, and they brought them along with them. And that's what we understand to mean. But the Or HaChaim says no. He says what it's referring to is the fact that Avram and Sarai could not have children. They were not biologically able to create a vehicle to house those souls. But the souls are still being created. Which means that Nefesh HaSochar was all, so to speak, the spiritual creations that they had, but they were not embodied yet. They were not able to find a place yet until later on when God facilitated that, which is a profound, profound observation. So before we even get to the, so to speak, childbirth itself, it's important to understand the earlier stages. Just like we're careful in pregnancy about the biological, the health care, one has to also be spiritually aware as well. And this is something which Judaism places a great emphasis on. Although certainly not in a 101 Judaism reader. But it's important to appreciate the significance of this, and in the sense that there are three partners in a human being, right? And it's always so funny, because like when you look at the baby and you say, oh my gosh, it's like dad's eyes and mom's eyebrows and, granddad's chin, and you look at all these things and you're like, it's amazing, right? And then and then where did the character come from? It's like personality is like, I don't know. That's not mom, that's not dad, that's not, there's going to be certain mannerisms later on as we condition, right? There'll be mannerisms which will be adopted. But base character, hardwiring, algorithms, that's not us. And that's exactly the point, is that wasn't you. Character is a function of the soul. And the soul was not you, that was God. The question is, what are you drawing down into this world that is going to be attached? That you're going to have to steward that soul to become who it is, but you don't have too much control of what we'll call the hard wiring. Environmentalism, yes, you're going to provide the ultimate environment, but that depends on this idea over here. So now, that's so to speak a precursor to this whole process. It's important to appreciate this, because this is not just at the end of the process. Now, when you start figuring things out, so the question is, are there prayers to be said during pregnancy? Now, the answer is, of course there are. Of course there are, and the more that young people go through this process, the more vulnerable they realize they are, and certainly one should pray. But are there specific prayers? And the truth is there are actually. So there are a number of Tehillim which are recommended, and I shall put them out in the FAQ or FAS at the end, where there's a whole bunch of Tehillim which are to be said. But also the Chidah, Rav Chaim Yosef David Azulai, wrote many centuries ago a number of specific prayers to be said at the end of the first trimester, the beginning of the 9th month, and then during active labor as well. What's interesting is the way he framed it was the husband praying on behalf of the wife, right? So it's framed as in that, certainly in active labor that makes sense, but it certainly doesn't have to be that way. It's not specifically on your husband oriented. It's about certainly the wife, and that's the most powerful, most potent prayer. But just to give you a sense of some of the ideas that are included in them, and I'm going to hand this out at the end. At the end of the first trimester, the words that he includes are, he says, it's akel me'alea tsar ha'ibur. Let it be that the pain of pregnancy is going to be lightened. It's a very difficult process for many. V'asei leman rachamecha. It should be your mercy. She'yiskay ma'ibur b'brios. This pregnancy should be in health. V'yigmor letova b'chol evorov v'gidav v'akol mitzukan v'lo tapil ishti. There should be no miscarriage, God forbid, and that all the limbs should form naturally. You'll notice that prayers always, when it's still possible to change. As the Mishnah says in Brachos, you can't daven to have a male or female at the stage, right? Because that's a done deal, right? So that's not something which, but at this critical process of formation and growth, that is something you can pray for, because there's a lot that is still at stake while we're around 12 weeks in. As you're entering the 9th month, then the prayer becomes more intense, and with all the introductions and epilogues, we add on over here the Taled ben Akel. May it be the birthing is easy. Beli shum tsa'ar, it should be without any pain. But terem yavo hakol la v'imlita ubra lachayim tovim u'lashalom. The child should enter this world in peace and health. B'shah tova u'mazal tov lanu v'levlad lo yerala v'lo levlad shum tsa'ar v'shum nezek v'shum mikra ra chas v'shalom. There should be nothing that happens to the mother or the child in this process. So anticipating, looking at the end of this process, because now the light is at the end of the tunnel. And during active labor, the Chidah suggests reading the 20th chapter in Tehillim 12 times round. It happens to be that the wording or the vowelization of God's name has 12 different permutations. Not getting into that right now, but after that, saying a Yiratzon that is describing that in the name of the matriarch Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, that Hashem should have mercy upon her, v'tizkarena l'tova, v'tivkedena l'bracha, ki aneha l'cha t'luyois. And Hashem, we're looking to you. My wife is looking to you. And remember, we live in such an incredible age of medical technology, but even still, it's touch and go. Please, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, let this be healthy. Let this be a healthy process. Let her have mercy. So there's a lot that can be done, and a lot of people don't necessarily know or have the tools to know what it is that we're supposed to be saying. Let's dig into some of the more practical questions that I said. So what happens if? So let's frame it in the way that questions are asked. So if I go into labor on Shabbos, what do I do? So I'll tell you a little secret: is that our first child. So that's our little Moshe. A number of years back. So and my wife's water broke as we said Shalom Aleichem. So that was the beginning of the process. So going back into this, so what do you do at that stage in the game? In order to appreciate this, it's just important to understand that when a person is in a state of sakonas nefashos or safek sakonas nefashos, so a person is in a life-threatening condition or even a questionably life-threatening condition, then that person may be mechalel or mechaleles Shabbos. That is very clear in Shulchan Aruch. And then the Shulchan Aruch specifically applies that to birth. Birth is seen as a place certainly of pikuach nefesh. And the Shulchan Aruch adds a kula and a chumrah to this. And it adds a leniency and a stringency to this at the same time. What are those? So the first thing the Shulchan Aruch points out, and this is all in Shulchan Aruch, in Shin Lamed, the end of Hilchos Shabbos, very important section there in Shulchan Aruch about refuah on Shabbos, about all the necessary healthcare laws related to Shabbos. The first is the leniency, which is that you may do things like umadlikin la ner. You may do things which are perhaps extraneous to the immediate medical requirements right now. That's included in the orbit of what's necessary to be done for a woman who is giving birth. However, he says that at the same time, you have to, if there are other options, meaning if there are ways to do things less of a Chilul Shabbos, then one does it if possible. So, as example, driving a car to the hospital is a biblical transgression of Shabbos. Getting a taxi is a rabbinic. If there's not going to be a difference in time, then it would be better to get a taxi than it would be to drive. Right? Because driving, every time you're hitting that accelerator, that spark plug is going. That is a biblical action every single time you're doing that. Whereas, when it comes to a taxi, you're transgressing what's called Amir La'akum, where you're having a non-Jew doing the work for you, the biblical work for you by driving. That would be preferable. Again, if there's no time to be had, then of course one does what's necessary. But then, again, it's not always the same situation when it comes to planning this out. But before we get there, you need to know what to do. And in a lot of times, it's not so obvious. The contractions have started. How far apart are they? How intense are they? Has the water broke? Are there any other symptoms? And for that, you don't always necessarily know yourself. So the first thing to do is call the doctor. Right? So that's the most important thing. It's important, first thing to do is to call the doctor on Shabbos. And then the question becomes so which way, what is the best way to do it? Should I be trying to do this as a shinur? And the answer is not really, because you're going to just end up making more blunders. And then you're going to have to really just call. Better to have a speed dial, which is great. So you just to hit one and hold, and it goes straight to the doctor, and speak to the doctor, and the doctor will advise from then. Oh, okay. Being as the situation is this, being as we know that there's gestational diabetes, being as that the baby is big, being as the baby is small, being as you haven't felt. All those go into the consideration. The doctor will say, you know what, we'll wait a few hours until, or the doctor will say, I think you should go right now. That's the most important thing first that happens, and that needs to be done on Shabbos. Now, technically speaking, if you look at the Shulchan Aruch, the Shulchan Aruch says certain benchmarks, 3 benchmarks as to when it is that a woman enters the category of a cholah sheyesh bo sakana in order to facilitate getting to the hospital. However, today with all the complexities and with our knowledge, which has now made it more, it is important to realize that even at an early stage where perhaps a woman is not in active labor, she just doesn't know what stage she's in yet, then at that point in time she should call the doctor certainly, who will advise as to what the next stages are. And so if he says, just keep walking and call me when, then at that point in time she's not in a cholah sheyesh bo sakana yet, but then she'll wait until that point. Why could she call? The answer is because she's certainly in the case of cholah sheyesh bo sakana, where rabbinic laws are suspended in that case. That's the call. and then she would wait until the time the doctor advises, or if she feels that there's something wrong, or she feels that there is an urgency herself, would go to the hospital, and then that's when the whole process starts as well. So what about the husband? Now, husbands, generally speaking, are kind of like left-hand shoes when it comes to this whole process. They're very useless in this whole process. But nonetheless, so what should the husband do during this process? Is he allowed to go to the hospital? The answer is for sure. And part of that is because part of kol tzracheh, which is a concept in halacha, of all the needs of that person, is having somebody there to advocate and to support at the same time. You cannot be in this health system today without an advocate. It's dangerous for a person to be in a hospital by themselves. And certainly a person who's going through active labor. Now, there might be an add-on. There might be mom, doula, right? A sister. There's other people who might also be there as well. But if it's going from the house or the apartment and husband is over there, he should be going with her, not separately, because the Chilul Shabbos is on her behalf, and the needs of her needs are going together with him as well to the hospital as well. So the question is there a preferable way to get to the hospital? So when the time comes, the answer is yes. Yes, it should certainly be a taxi, not not driving. If again time dependent, there's some times where it's you get to the hospital and so it's half an hour from there, and that's you don't want to be in that situation where you're going straight from triage into the labor and delivery. So, but assuming that things are progressing at a regular rate, and you get to the what's the preferable way of getting to the hospital? So today it's so much easier because we have Uber, right? And then there's a regular taxi, and regular taxis in a certain sense are getting harder to find. Technically speaking, it would be better to minimize Chilul Shabbos. So if one has the capacity to call up a taxi service before Shabbos, and one has a relationship with a taxi service, and calls up before Shabbos and says, look, how much does it cost to get from here to North Shore, to South Nassau, to Winthrop, to whatever it is that one is going to, and it's a $35 fee. So and one could have on speed dial that taxi company and say, I'd like to call tomorrow. When I call, I'd like to send a taxi of $35. We may want to put the tip in over there. I'm not going to say what we're doing these days. They start off with 25% these days, But as you put the money in an envelope, you put it on the outside of the bag. Yeah, and this way, there's one call and that's it. Whereas Uber, it's always more complicated because then you're typing in and you have to take the phone and it's a whole thing. So if that's possible, that's certainly preferable. It's not always so simple today. It's not as many taxi services, and they're not always so easy to facilitate. One would do that as well. I know there's actually there was a doctor in our shul who worked in oncology. He had to work in New Jersey, and he had calls on Shabbos, so he would have to go out early Shabbos morning. So he had a set driver who would always take him. But then he found out that this particular driver in Lyft was Jewish. You have to so you had to be anti-Semitic to say, I just don't want a Jewish driver, right? Because you have to make sure that you're not being taken by the Jew. But be it as it may. So organizing a little bit of pre-organization is helpful. And even if something like even if one is using Uber, to have it in one's address book as well already, just the simpler it is, the less to have to worry about later on is better as well. The question then is the following: what happens if husband is in shul and I go into in labor? This happens a lot of times, and around Yom Naraim this comes up a lot. So I'm worried that husband is going to be in shul and something's going to happen. So there are lots of ways of solving this issue, and one is that husband should daven more locally, so he should be more available. And if there's a neighbor who one can send, that's obviously preferable to be able to get a husband out of shul. And if things are looking like they are moving along, then maybe husband should daven at home if it's necessary. If that's a concern. Meaning, let's plan carefully. When this becomes more complicated is when you have longer davenings like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and then she wants him to be davening. She wants to be davening, but she's concerned that then they become it becomes a little more complicated. It's a case-by-case basis. But I think some people just automatically take their phone. It's not so simple that's necessary if the one puts the correct checks and balances that are in place as well. Now, what should one bring to the hospital? So when it comes to the labor and delivery department, everybody knows what they need, right? So the slippers and the gown, everything else that's needed, that one should plan well ahead. Certainly once in the 9th month, there should be a bag which is ready to go. That's just a practical solution. But there's also called the religious items department, which is that one should also have the necessary things like a tehillim, like a siddur, like a plug-in lamp for candles, like grape juice and 3 rolls to be able to get through Shabbos in case that's the situation. And one should have that all set so that there's less to worry about later on when Shabbos comes in. If there are muksa items, really technically speaking, it's better to have those out if not necessary for the process. So it's a one-stop option as well. What happens when you get to one extra step is what about, let's say the taxi arrives. So it is important to remind the taxi driver that he or she should open the door, because every time you open the door, that's switching on the lights, and same thing with closing the door. So you take a more of a regal attitude to your travel, and you ask them to open the door on either side. And when one gets to the hospital complex, it's important to realize that sometimes a hospital is not enclosed and therefore is not in the Eruv. And that being the case, you can't carry your bags out. So therefore, you would ask that the taxi driver if you wouldn't mind just helping us. We're a neighbor. If you wouldn't mind just bringing them into the hospital as well to avoid that issue. On this side, if one's in the suburbs and there's an Eruv, great. If one's in the city and one's in an area where there's not an Eruv, one will have to have that on the other side as well in order to be able to facilitate that as well. What about the elevator? So most metropolitan hospitals in the New York area have a Shabbos elevator, which is great. So wait for that. But then it also, again, there's the notion of it also depends how far into labor is this. How fast is this progressing? If it's the Katz Women's Hospital in, let's say, North Shore, which is the 3rd floor, right, and one's in a position to be able to go up. Don't use the Shabbos elevator. If we're talking about something which is the labor's progressiveness is just not possible right now, or the floor is too high, then use the Shabbos elevator. If there is no Shabbos elevator, the Shabbos elevator is out the Shabbos. So what does one do? It would be best to wait for another patient, and one can assume another patient in the hospital is a Chodesh Yesh Basakana, that's why they're there. And you wait for them to go into the elevator, and of course, most polite people these days will ask what number, and you're allowed to respond what number it is, but it would be better to wait for another patient going up in such a situation as well. Of course, if there's a immediate need and there's that the situation doesn't exist, it would be better one can go in the elevator and hit with a shinoi, but that so to speak, there's a triage. There's stages over here of preparation. Signing documents. So these days they've got the thing called the hospital tour, right? So you don't just go to hospital. You go and visit it a few months in advance, and they show you where everything is, and they take you on a tour, and there's a dedicated person. It's a whole thing. And so going to hospital today is much more planned than it used to ever be. And that being the case, so at that point in time, you say, what are the documentations that you need from me already? So pre-sign everything. Most of the documents can already be submitted. However, there are certain things that need to be signed then, and that's not always so simple. Sometimes you can convince the staff that we can't. It's our Sabbath. Is it possible to do this afterwards? And they'll be lenient. But a lot of times, for legal reasons, the hospital will not be willing to go in that direction. That being the case, so you have a choice to make. And if the choice is getting medical services or not, then one may do it, but it would be better to sign that with a shinui. So taking the pen, let's having it protrude from backwards from one's hand and sign upside down, right? Would be preferable in that case if it's in order to facilitate starting the process as well. What about my phone in the hospital? So it depends. Again, if one's stuck with Uber, then it's probably a good idea to have the phone in the hospital. But if it's just so to make it easier afterwards, that's not necessarily a reason, right? There are ways to cope with getting back from the hospital afterwards. They do have phones in hospitals. It is possible to figure out things without it. And so it would be better not to, if it's just for the after as well. If there are perhaps needs, like that might be immediate, as an example, let's say one's going to the hospital, and the doctor one's seeing, the OBGYN needs to be called, and they have privileges, but they might want to wait until such a time that the labor has reached a certain point to drive in, then one should take it because that's for the needs of the chola at that situation. If that's not the case, the doctor's going to be there or is just not going to be there, and there's no specific we'll call medical gain at that point in time. Harder to require that because that's not the immediate needs of the person who's sick. What about taking showers? So that's for sure that all the so to speak comfort needs of going through labor and delivery are allowed, certainly during the process of active labor. This is a tricky one, which is harder to explain and harder to do, and that is contact between husband and wife. So this most people are not aware of. is that when a woman is in active labor, at a certain point, that she turns into a state of nida, and the husband and wife cannot have physical contact. When is that stage? So one of two options is that either when she's not able to walk again, but usually that's not necessary to even get to that point, is when there's bleeding, and there's lots of bleeding, right? So at that point in time, she would be in a state of nida, and the husband may not be in contact with, which requires planning, because first of all, it's the time when one would want to be most supportive and holding hands, and to be helping in such a way, which is why again in Judaism it pays if there's going to be a doula or is going to be somebody else who can fulfill that we'll call physical support role, whereas the husband with the emotional support role. These are important things to plan ahead because there will be such a time, which also dictates another important piece, and that is, where is dad standing? So it's important that it's a husband and a wife who are, when they're in a stage of separation because of being in a state of nida, the husband may not be looking at the woman when she is immodestly dressed, and so watching the birth directly is not appropriate for the husband. The best case scenario would be for the husband to be behind the bed, by the head of the bed, as well as things are set up, if possible, if that is a possibility as well. And this requires dexterity, requires planning and discussions beforehand, so as to understand that there's as much support as is possible, but there's also limitations in that as well. What about calling the nurse? So a lot of times you're kind of abandoned in these institutions, right? And they kind of do their thing and then off they go. And now you really need them, and the epidural's not taking, and I'm worried about this, and there's all these things that happen. And so how do I get the nurse? So when it comes to during labor, one may call the nurse directly. If it's postpartum, then at that stage in time, it's still state of cholesh she'en bo sakana. One should try calling, but if that is to no avail, then one should do the shinoi to hit that button to be able to get the nurse. But if this as an advocate, it's easier just to go to the nurse station and say, my wife needs X, my wife needs Y, she has a question about Z. What about the protocol for letting family members know that the baby was born on Shabbos, right? So my first child, which we were blessed with, was born at 12:55 a.m. on Friday night. Yes, that was a short labor. And so the question is what about, can you call the answering machine, tell the nurse to call the answering machine? Mazel tov, you have a grandchild. And the truth is, not really. That's not the needs of Shabbos. Meaning that's not the needs of the Choila, and that's not the needs of Shabbos at that point in time. In fact, for us, it was a very beautiful blessing to have 18 hours of personal time before the rest of the world would know and reach us about all the mazel tovs and considerations and plannings and everything else that's going to come. That's part 2 of the series. And we'll get to Shalom Zachos, Simchat Basas and Brisses. That's later. But at this point in time, it's the ability to savor that moment. It's not necessary. It's not a need of the Cholah. Now, here's a thing which I would imagine that most parents, most new parents, certainly do not know. And it's good as grandparents to remind children of this as well. Is there a bracha? And the answer is yes, there is a bracha, absolutely, upon the birth of a child. And for a boy, the bracha is Hatov HaMeitiv. For a girl, is Shechianu. These are brachas which both the parents should be saying when they're able to have the ability to first hold that child. Most people don't know this. Most people miss this out. For the Sfardim, it's a little easier because what they do is they place the Shechianu later on or the Hatov HaMeitiv later on at the bris. So when it comes to Ashkenazim, it should be done, and it's never too late. I don't believe, but these are brachas which somebody should be aware of as well. Which leads to the next bracha, which is the Birkas Hagomel. Going through such a situation is a very, very humbling experience because you realize that this process is not elective, right? This process, once it starts, there's no going back, right? And it's terrifying because you realize how vulnerable you are at this process when you're getting on. So I remember when I went to our first Lamaz class with a group, little group of people, and we were all due around a certain 5-week window. And one of my friends, who was the later end of the group, said, it feels like I'm waiting at the theme park and everybody's getting onto this roller coaster and it's terrifying, but everybody walks off smiling. It is terrifying. So you get out of this process. It's a remarkable process, and to see the miraculous the miraculous process is unbelievable. So now let's say a person comes out of this, a woman should absolutely say Hagomel. Now it happens to be that there is a little debate. Should she wait 7 days? Maybe she should wait 30 days as to when to say the Birkas Hagomel. Should be the first time she comes back to shul. And the truth is that really when the opportunity presents, she should really say it in a minyan. So I would recommend that if a woman is up to it at the bris, that's a beautiful time to be able to say it. Generally speaking, with a Kriyas Shem for a girl, usually mom is not present. Just it's too early and it's early in the morning. It's complicated. Although I have had such a situation. We had one just recently where a mother was present for the naming of her daughter, which was very beautiful, and she said Birkas Hagomel. It's a wonderful thing. She's able to be out there and to say Birkas Hagomel. That's an incredibly beautiful thing. There are some women who are not comfortable with this. There are minhagim that the husband would say it on behalf of the wife. If the wife is not comfortable, the husband can say it, but it should really be in her presence. And if it is in her presence, when she comes back to shul, he would change the nusach to Hagomel l'chayavim to us shigmor leich kultiv. It really depends on, I would say, it depends on the wife. She's the one who has the responsibility of acknowledging this, and she should set the tone for this as well. There's many halachic options in this. The question which comes up all the time is just, and we're going to sort of stop in this space over here, is nursing. And so it becomes this in and of itself is a whole new parasha, certainly for new mothers. And the question which comes up actually got last Erev Shabbos, which was what about nursing into a bottle? What about nursing into a bottle for this child? So at the hospital, there's usually a lactation expert who comes and spends time with the new mother, and it tries to help out. And it's a whole new process. It can be very painful for a lot of people. What happens if a mother needs to nurse into a bottle in order to feed the child? So it depends. So when it comes to Shabbos, the truth is that mothers can nurse children on Shabbos. That should be an obvious thing. That should be obvious, right? But the question is what happens when one's not nursing the child? One's nursing into a bottle, into a container, and for whatever reason. So reason number one could be is the mother is not nursing, whether it's a choice or just she cannot, or there's issues, and so the baby's now on formula, and the mother is now pumping in order to A, alleviate pressure, or B, to store as well, for the child as well. So how does this work? So it turns out that actually nursing itself, nursing not for the child directly, is actually a transgression of dash, right? Which is one of the prohibitions on Shabbos, if it's not directly for the child. So it depends. So if it's a situation where mom is not nursing and it's mostly formula, but she's also freezing and freezing the milk for the usage in the coming weeks, and she's going to be going back to work in 6 weeks, and she wants to have a supply. And in that case, that would not be allowed on Shabbos. Like, you've done the rest of the week, but she's not allowed to nurse to store on Shabbos. If the situation is she wants the baby to have mother's milk, but the baby is having trouble with lactating, the baby itself cannot attach at the beginning, and so therefore it needs to be through the process of bottle, but she does not want to use primarily formula. She wants to use her milk for the baby's sustenance. Then in that case, it is all right, because it's essentially a vehicle to nursing the baby on Shabbos itself. So that being the case, that would be the decision. And this is always a difficult one, because let's say it's the former of those options. The baby has enough to get through Shabbos, but it's difficult to waste milk, because after all, that's going to be a store, which is going to be very helpful later on. That part is not allowed. Shabbos is not allowed to be used to building up a stock. And so in that case, it would have to be, it would not be allowed to store it. Why would she be able to nurse into a bottle she's not feeding on Shabbos? That would only be allowed if it's to disengorge herself, because the pain and the pressure of the build-up of milk. Then she would have to do it, but she would have to throw that out. What some suggest is put like a little bit of dish soap into the bottle so that it automatically spoils, so that you're not going to be storing that milk on the process of Shabbos if it's not directly for the baby. If it's the baby on Shabbos, that's fine. If it's for afterwards, it's not fine to be done on Shabbos. How does one do that? So there are three options, of course. One is by hand. That's just to release the pressure. That's not very efficient. There's hand pumps, which are fine on Shabbos, and there are machines. And machines are actually allowed in this situation, but the way it should be done is the machine should be set up on a timer. So whatever the interval is, a 3-hour timer, and it's set to go on. So it's 9 o'clock, it's 12 o'clock, it's 3 o'clock all the way throughout Shabbos. and so the machine is going to, and it's attached to the machine is going to go on at every interval for, let's say, the half an hour, or however much is necessary. So in such a case, the woman should attach the equipment before it goes on. So one plans one Shabbos in such a way, and then in that way, one can nurse in a more efficient way and be able to, if that's going directly to the baby, great, and if not, it's going to, that milk is going to be disposed of and not used as well, just for the sake of the mother to keep her milk as well. So a lot of different, we'll call little nuances that relate to this particular stage in halacha, which a lot of things are not talked about. I'd like to conclude our learning today with a observation which is made by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, which I think is really a really profound observation, which is that in the Torah, if you carry on reading as we start with Parshas Tazria, that we're not going to address the Tumah and Tahara stages after postpartum. There's a lot to talk about there, but there is a korban of yoledes. A woman who gives birth brings a korban in the times of the biblical era. She will bring a korban. And it seems to be that a lot of the commentators understand that to be as some form of kapara. And the question is, a kapara? She has just brought life into this world. What in the world is she? Why does she have to bring a korban? A korban is usually some form of debt or guilt. Why is that the case? So the classical commentators have many suggestions, and everything resonates with people differently. Rabbeinu Bachai and the Klei Yaakov, for instance, suggest that this relates back to the state of being in a post-Eden world, right? So we all live in a state of complexity. We'll call creation 2, after the sin in Eden. So in that reality, men are punished when living in the state of bezeas apecha toch alechem, and the so to speak, the Eden 2 or the creation 2 when it comes to women is betzar tel dibonim, is the pain of childbirth. So we're commemorating, this is the so to speak actualization of what happened in Genesis 3. That's going back all the way back then. This is the pain and the difficulty of this process is going back to that stage. That's what Rabbeinu Bachai says over here. It's a state of being which we hope will be changed as we enter, so it's back to creation 1 in the future. Ibn Ezra says that on a more psychological note, is that we'll call it certainly in the pre-epidural days, when a woman is going through that amount of pain, there are going to be thoughts that go through her mind is like, never again. Never again. It's funny because that's around the 2-year mark, because you start forgetting, and you start saying, oh, they're so cute and they're wonderful. They start talking now, and you're like, oh, this is wonderful. You forget. Thank God we forget, right? But during that process itself, in that immense pain, then at such a time, thoughts might go through a person's mind saying never again. That itself is a negativity to the fact that one would never want to be in such a situation again. Ibn Ezra says that it's a reframing or a kapara for that as well. The Ramban says no, it's nothing to do with kapara at all. This is an expression almost of the Hagomel, the ultimate Hagomel, which is, thank you, Hashem, for allowing me through this process to come out the other end to be a life giver. Thank you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for allowing me to be able to do this. That's what the korban is about as well. The Sforno says, no, it's when a person goes through this process, it is supremely physical, right? It is supremely an experience of the material. And one needs to recalibrate one's life, that it's not just about the physical childbearing, but it's about the spiritual upbringing of this child. And the korban is there to, so to speak, reacquaint us with the other aspect of this life, which is meant to be. It's not just physical survival as well. And the Rav Meir Simcha Dvinsk, who is the Meshech Chochma, the Or Sameach, observes that it's like a korban olas riyah, because as a woman exits the stage of childbirth, she's going to go back to the temple, and this is so to speak, the recognition of her ability to enter the temple again at the biblical times, to be able to appear in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu after having gone through this. Without addressing the Tumah and Tahara, Rabbi Sachs makes the observation that he quotes a Gemara which is in Sanhedrin, where it describes when HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself we'll call it the creation process. Our childbirthing is a microcosm of the incredible power and potency of creation itself. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to create human being, it said that he consulted with the Malachim. And there are many versions of this conversation which is had. So the first, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Lamed Ches Amud Beis, describes HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Naaseh Adam, consultation, the Pamalia Shalmala, the celestial palace, and he says, should we create the human being? So the angels say, well, let's see the transcript. Like, let's take a look at the historical context of what's going to happen with this. And they said, well, no way. No way. Look what they're going to do. I mean, there's a lot of good, but there's a lot of bad. There's a lot of risk that comes with this investment. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu destroy those malachim. So then HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates a new set of malachim, new sets of agencies of power in this world, and he says, should we create human beings? And they say the same thing, let's take a look at the future. And they're like, my goodness, not a chance. HaKadosh Baruch Hu removes those angels, creates a third set of angels, and asks them again. So the angels said, look, we understand that we can say no, because that's the answer, but if we say no, we're going to be wiped out, so do what you want. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's an amazing negotiation process. HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the human being, and then comes the times later on in history, there's a generation of the flood, and there's bestiality, and there's anarchy, and there's all these kind of things. And the angels turned to Hashem and said, wasn't this what we were talking about? Wasn't this what we were talking about? And the Gemara describes that HaKadosh Baruch Hu responds, and he says, quoting the pasuk in Yeshayahu, is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, even in old age, even at a later stage, I'm going to va'amalek. I'm going to still bear them. I'm going to still bear the imperfect creation of the human being itself. Rasak says, transpose that conversation in a certain sense to parenting itself, to bringing a life into this world. And certainly anybody who's been a parent for a while understands the immense vulnerability of being a parent. The vulnerability of now having somebody that one has to care about the rest of one's entire life. One's going to always be emotionally tethered to this person, and one is vulnerable through that. But more than vulnerable, one's also responsible. Do you know that this human being is going to be a contributing member to the context of this world, to humanity? Is it going to uplift the world, or could this child be a destructive force in the world and destroy the foundations and create more bad than good? That's big. The coin's still in the air as it spins, right? And there's a lot that we try to control, but there's a lot that we don't have the control over. And as a parent, so to speak, like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is parenting humanity, is stewarding humanity into the world, we as parents have that same danger, or that same feeling of fear and risk as we bring a child into the world. And like HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we say, you know what? There is great risk in this endeavor. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. We don't know how long this life will even be. But we're taking that risk, like HaKadosh Baruch Hu did. We will try the best. We're going to pray, and we're going to beg, and we're going to do everything to invest in this child, that they should be successful, they should be well, they should contribute, they should elevate this world, they should bring more light into this world. And that's in a certain sense the parallel to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's creation. And love brings us to irrational risks, which is what we take. Bringing a child into the world is an irrational risk in today's day and age, certainly. But it's a risk that's worth taking, like HaKadosh Baruch Hu took the risk on us as imperfect people who continue to make mistakes, but continue to validate our creation. And that's why, says Rav Sachs, we bring this particular korban at the end of this, is acknowledging the risk that we took, but still validating the fact that we have the capacity of that creation as well. So closing this full circle in terms of just the birthing process, some of the technical aspects of it, some of the more philosophical aspects of it. What do we have to look forward to now? Now we move into actually celebrating life. What is a Shalom Zachar, a Simchat Bat, a Bris? All these pieces that are going to be coming in the next stages. Bezrat Hashem, looking down at the road, we have options. We have a lot of opportunities to be learning Bezrat Hashem. I thank everybody for coming. And what I'm going to do is I'm also going to ask. I'm going to now hand out for anybody just a brief summary of this of what we did. If this is helpful, and I hope that this is something which will elevate our experience, and for those us who have people going through this as